Hello and welcome to Haunted Montreal's Spooky Story Sessions. I'm your host, Holly Rhiannon, and today I'm going to tell you all about the haunted fort on St. Helens Island. Here at Haunted Montreal, we bring you ghost stories in both French and English every Saturday. Before we get into today's story, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button so you get notified every time we have a new tale to tell. And hey, if you're already subscribed, welcome back. We are so happy to have you here. Now, without further ado, let's get spooky. St. Helens Island juts out of the swirling and tumultuous waters of the St. Lawrence River just to the southeast of Old Montreal. The storied outcrop has a remarkable history, including one site that attracts the most hardened paranormal investigators. Perched on a slope in the middle of the north part of the island looms a creepy old British fort that has long been reputed to be haunted. Today, the fortified structure houses the Stuart Museum, which describes itself as celebrating the influence of European civilization in New France and North America. With noteworthy exhibitions and thousands of historic artifacts, the museum attracts large crowds of visitors each year. While most guests seek a historical lesson at the museum, some of them search for something entirely different: the ghosts and paranormal activities that are said to plague the old fort. But before examining the fort's hauntings, paranormal activities, and ghost hunters, a history of the island is in order. St. Helens Island has volcanic origins, and its three small peaks rise 30 meters out of the waters of the St. Lawrence River. Approximately 200,000 years old, the island measures 3 kilometers by 600 meters. It has been used by various First Nations people for thousands of years, as evidenced by archaeological discoveries at 2 sites on the island. Pottery fragments and ancient broken smoking pipes suggest that the island was frequented by St. Lawrence Iroquoians, a First Nation that has since mysteriously disappeared. During Jacques Cartier's voyage of exploration in 1535, he landed on what is now known as Montreal Island, but he failed to mention its tiny cousin, today's St. Helens Island. This island wasn't given a European name until 1611, when it was visited by Samuel de Champlain. Admiring the island's natural beauty, he decided to name it in honor of his 13-year-old wife, Helen de Champlain. Just a year earlier, she had been given in marriage to Samuel, who was 31 years her senior. St. Helens Island appears on a map he drew at the bottom in the middle of the St. Lawrence River. The island witnessed several deaths during the early years of French colonization. On June 5, 1611, a Montagnais leader named Outcrop and a French colonist named Louis drowned while attempting to shoot the swirling rapids after hunting for heron on a nearby island. Outcrop was buried on St. Helens Island, whereas Louis's death would go on to influence Montreal's toponymy. The turbulent waters where the men drowned were named Sault St. Louis Rapids, and further to the west, where the river widens, the body of water was named Lake St. Louis in honor of the drowned Frenchman. The island saw death again on August 9, 1664, when French colonists Jacques Dufresne and Pierre Menat were killed by Iroquois warriors. Following the establishment of the Ville Marie colony on Montreal Island in 1642, a state of war broke out between the local Mohawk First Nation and the French colonizers, who were attempting to convert them to Catholicism. The first record of ownership of the island dates back to 1635, when the Company of New France granted the seigneury of Citière, which included St. Helens Island, to François de Lauzon, the governor's son. In 1657, de Lauzon ceded a strip of seigneury to Charles Le Moyne, including St. Helens and Ronde Island. Remarkably, in 1700, the King of France designated Charles Le Moyne as a baron to honor his military achievements, making him the only person in New France to ascend into the nobility. The Longueuil seigneury, as such, was also declared a barony, the only one to exist in New France. In 1760, British soldiers marched on Montreal and the city capitulated, putting an end to the New France project. However, the new British overlords did not dispute the private ownership of lands, so St. Helens Island remained in the hands of the Longueuil family in the following years. The British wanted the island to build a fort on it following the War of 1812, a conflict that saw American militias invading Upper and Lower Canada, albeit unsuccessfully. To better defend Montreal, they wanted to build a fort, powder house, barracks, and blockhouse on the St. Helens Island. In 1888, the Baroness of Longueuil authorized the state of the island to the British government for the sum of £15,000. The fort was then constructed between 1820 and 1824 according to the plans of Lieutenant Colonel Elias Walker Drumford, an officer of the Royal Engineers. It included an ammunition arsenal, weapons depot, barracks, a small powder house, and a guardhouse surrounded by a thick limestone wall. Outside the fortified complex stood a large bomb-proof powder house which could hold up to 5,000 barrels of gunpowder. Designed to serve as an arsenal and storage facility, it was part of a defensive chain of forts built to protect Canada from the threat of an American invasion. The stone used to build the fort is a mix of red breccia, quarried locally on the island, and grey field stones from Montreal's original fortifications, which were dismantled a few years earlier. Between 1832 and 1834, Montreal was hit with a crisis. After a ship carrying infected immigrants, a cholera epidemic began ravaging the city. The fort was pressed into use as a cholera hospital, and many of the hospitalized surely died there because the disease is highly contagious and had a death rate often higher than 50%. The epidemic claimed almost 200 victims in Montreal, killing almost 6% of the inhabitants. It left in its wake devastated, broken families and hundreds of orphans whose parents had succumbed to the disease. But more change was yet to come. In 1829, a military cemetery was laid out in the eastern part of the island. In 1837, the fort changed vocation again when it was transformed into a military prison following a series of rebellions. It was ravaged by fire in 1848, but was rebuilt from 1863 to 1864. Only 4 years later, in 1867, the Dominion of Canada was created on July 1st. The British troops left Canada in 1870, and the Canadian government acquired the island and transformed it into a public park in 1874. The fort was active during both World Wars. During World War I, it served as a munitions depot, and in the 1930s, it was restored as a Depression-era job creation project. During World War II, the fort was converted into an internment camp called S-43. POWs in this camp, mostly of Italian and German nationality, were forced to do hard labor, including farming and chopping down trees. In 1944, the internment camp was closed following the release of an internal report about the mistreatment of prisoners. The David M. Stewart Museum was founded in 1955 to collect, store, and display historical artifacts from Canada's colonial past, particularly from the era of New France. Established within the fort, the museum's collections include artifacts dating from the 16th century through to the 19th. During the 1960s, St. Helens Island saw major changes because it was chosen as the site of Expo 67, a world fair on the theme of man and his world. Using 28 million tons of earth excavated from the construction of the Montreal Metro, St. Helens Island was greatly enlarged and merged with several nearby islands. The adjacent Notre Dame Island was also constructed at this time to host pavilions for over 60 countries for the World's Fair. From April 27th to October 29th, 1967, 50 million visitors attended Expo 67, which is considered to be the most successful World's Fair of the 20th century. After the closing of the Expo in 1967, the site was renamed the Parc des Îles de Montréal. In 1999, it was renamed again, this time to Parc Jean Drapeau, in honor of former mayor of Montreal who had built the Montreal Metro, enlarged the island, and brought Expo 67 to the city. Returning to the fort and the museum, while visitors can enjoy some exceptional exhibitions and activities at the museum, they must also contend with all sorts of paranormal activity. There are many reports of hauntings at the museum. Strange apparitions have been spotted lurking in the shadows. The sound of phantom boots can sometimes be heard marching in unison as though soldiers were marching in formation. Objects are also known to go missing, and some visitors complain about feelings of malaise and shortness of breath. Add to this mysterious mists, strange lights, disembodied voices, and the unexplained smell of smoke, and it's easy to conclude that the fort is very haunted. One box office worker, who is a bit creeped out working at the fort, suggested that there's at least one ghost that she's aware of. The spirit is a quartermaster or cook from long ago, according to the young lady. She heard reports that the area where the barracks kitchen used to be is haunted. People have smelled a wood fire burning and heard the sounds of pots clanging, despite the fact that no fire is lit and the area is not used as a kitchen anymore. The most famous quartermaster to work the military canteen was a gruff philanthropist named Charles McKiernan, also known as Joe Beef. After feeding troops during the Crimean War, he was transferred to Montreal in 1864 with his artillery regiment and charged with cooking for the troops stationed at the fort. When he was discharged in 1868, he opened Joe Beef's Canteen, an infamous inn and watering hole located at 201-207 Rue de la Commune in what is now Old Montreal. Hundreds of longshoremen, laborers, and seamen frequented the canteen to drink and have a meal. Wealthier clients could have steak and onions for 10 cents, while the poorer patrons received a bowl of soup and hunk of bread for free. The eccentric Joe Beef also kept a menagerie of wild animals in the cellar and 2 human skeletons behind the bar to entertain guests. Known to dislike authority, he supported striking Lachine Canal workers in 1877 by providing free bread and soup to the picket line. On January 15th in 1889, Joe Beef died suddenly of a heart attack. His funeral was one of the most well-attended in Montreal's history. Could Joe Beef's ghost have returned to haunt the old fort, perhaps to continue thwarting authority? The haunted fort was also featured on a French ghost investigation program on television called L'Encontre de Paranormal. In an episode titled Le Fort de Ile Sainte-Hélène et la Maison Hantée de Contrecoeur, paranormal expert and host Christian Page interviewed Laura Pavlovic, the education coordinator at the museum. She acknowledged that there are many reports of haunted activity and mentioned that security cameras sometimes pick up strange phenomena, such as lights turning themselves on and off. Christian Page also invited 3 mediums to the fort to try and communicate with the ghosts. The first medium, Michel-Alexandre Larchevêque, saw a spirit moving quickly near a basement wall and detected the ghosts of young soldiers. The second medium, Sylvain Bolduc, heard phantom boots marching and cutlery clinking in the area where the kitchen once existed. He also smelled paranormal smoke and witnessed the ghost of a prisoner in a green shirt who spoke Italian but not French. This spirit was likely an Italian prisoner in the S-43 internment camp, perhaps one of the inmates who had been mistreated. He also detected the ghosts of children, perhaps the spirits of orphans from the time when it was a cholera hospital. The third medium, Sylvia de Venso, identified the ghosts of people who had starved to death and others who were chained up, suggesting they could have originated from the time it was a military prison. According to hauntedplaces.org, Fort de Ile Sainte-Hélène on St. Helens Island is haunted by some of the 800 soldiers who were buried nearby in a mass grave, victims of enemy sharpshooters. Meanwhile, on the Chive, it's reported to be home of about 800 soldiers who lost their lives when their general purposefully put them in the line of the enemy fire of sharpshooters. However, a visit to the nearby military cemetery located to the southeast of the fort reveals no such nonsense. Estimates put the number of bodies in the cemetery at around 100. According to the commemorative plaque in the graveyard, inaugurated in 1935, there are a total of 58 known soldiers and several other of names unknown buried from various regiments and brigades. The plaque also informs visitors that several wives and many children were also buried here, but there's no mention whatsoever of 800 soldiers buried in mass graves. Furthermore, according to some sources, the graves were exhumed and the bodies were moved around 1915. Whatever the case, the curators of the Stuart Museum are not unaware of its ghosts. Indeed, they sometimes celebrate Halloween with a nocturnal event called Strange and Haunted Objects. Children aged 7 and up are invited to examine presumably cursed locks, keys, globes, telescopes, sundials, powder horns, kitchen accessories, antique prints, sculptures, miniature objects, hat boxes, and pipe cases, while hearing extraordinary tales about objects and ghosts in the creepy fort. The sum of all the ghostly rumors, paranormal investigations, and strange encounters suggests that the fort on St. Helens Island is very haunted. With so many stories about ghosts and paranormal activity at the fort and the museum, it's no wonder that it is such a popular place for mediums, ghost hunters, and curiosity seekers to visit. Are you a Montreal resident or perhaps a tourist who has had a strange experience on St. Helens Island or at the Stuart Museum? If so, we'd love to hear about it. As always, we're interested in hearing your theories about what might be going on. Thank you so much for stopping by. If this is your first video, we hope to see you again. We post new videos in both French and English every Saturday. If you'd like to learn more about the organization founded by the talented Donovan King, it's all listed in the description down below, along with links to in-person haunted storytelling tours. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment. We'll have a new video out for you next Saturday, but until then, stay spooky.